Thank you very much. Welcome back to another episode of the Languages Pedagogy podcast. Today we have another guest, as I always say, great guest, and I'm super happy and super glad actually to have another one. A wonderful teacher, wonderful professional, psychologist, and a whole bunch of other things that she can actually let us know. So she is Kate Grimes, right?
Yes, yeah.
Welcome. I always have problems with the last names. I don't know why. It always follow me. That's
Yeah.
kind of a problem there. Um, so today we're going to be talking about dyslexia and neurodiversity in the language classroom. Why traditional
Yes.
teaching fails and how to build learning that works for every brain. Now, with this little introduction, I would like you to introduce yourself, let the audience know who you are, what you do, and all this. Please. Welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So my name is Kate Grimes and I'm a licensed psychologist in the UAE. My background is in speech and language therapy. So I initially qualified as a speech and language therapist in Ireland. I'm qualified as a behavior analyst and I now practice as a psychologist here in Dubai. I've been living here for 15 years and I have my own practice that we're operating 11 years. So we provide assessment for cognitive areas, neurodevelopmental assessment. We provide mental health support, therapy support services, then around speech and language therapy, occupational therapy. We also provide trained learning support to parents. So we provide a whole kind of range of different services, but it's
Mhm.
basically bringing a parent along a journey from the initial assessment when maybe you have concerns about your child's how they're presenting or the difficulties that they're having. We can do the assessment and then guide you through the process to help students have a better time at school so that when they go into the school setting, they may need specialist support or therapeutic support. So we offer different supports to parents depending on what they need. And I think some of the stuff that we do is more applicable to the UAE where we're based than other countries. So it depends on the model that the country has in place the education system. Where in the UAE we have it's all private education. So if parents are advised that they need extra supports for their child, they have to pay for it themselves. And
Mhm.
obviously that's very difficult for some people, depending on what has been recommended. So we try our best to support those parents as well.
Wow. Well, that's a lot of work there, huh? I mean, for sure, your
So
time might be very limited.
I'm giving you a big load of info there, but we have a team
Mhm.
of therapists that work together, and that obviously brings lots of benefits because we have people from different countries with different
Mhm.
experience, and it's really enjoyable then to get the opportunity to work with people who have such a
Definitely.
broad variety of skills and knowledge, and then it's really nice to work with families. It's so multicultural here. I think it's like
Different
90, maybe
backgrounds.
93% is expat in the UAE.
Wow.
So then
Wow.
you get experience with working with lots of families and it's really interesting and nice to
Okay.
get to know lots about different cultures as well.
Yeah. That sounds really good, actually. That's a really nice experience, really nice background that you actually have because you get to know a little bit of each family, different
Yeah,
countries,
yeah.
different backgrounds, so
I
different
think you see,
cultural aspects because there's another aspect in society actually, that hits these type of topics as well. Some people actually
yeah,
take it in one
yeah.
way and some other ones take it in a different way, right?
Yeah, and I think it's just I suppose with experience you learn a bit more about different cultures and what how to support them in a way that is going to be, I suppose, as helpful to that family as you can. But generally,
Hmm.
people like parents are all looking for the same thing. They want their child to have the best chance to access school and learning and making friends and having an enjoyable time. So I think you learn that quite quickly as well, that no matter where people are from, they all want that for their child, and that's
Yeah.
what our aim is as well.
Well, that's the main goal, as parents for sure. everybody would like to have actually the best for their kids, and all of them have
Yeah,
the same goal, definitely. But
yeah,
obviously the cultural aspects also plays an important role, I think, because since you've
yeah,
been actually there in the UAE, you can actually be around different nationalities. For sure, you can see actually how they tackle the situation, how they actually manage this thing, and all that.
yeah.
Might be very interesting actually to be in that sense. So that means you are a multilingual also. Do you speak
I I
any
don't
language?
speak other languages.
Gotcha.
have Irish from Ireland, growing up in Ireland, and I did studied German. So I did used to have better German, but I don't speak it fluently now. I
Oh,
studied German in university. Yeah.
everything is in English there in the UAE.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Everything's in
beautiful.
English. Yeah.
Okay.
There is like some schools will be in Arabic, but the majority of the private schools here are English.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
Oh, sounds
yeah,
very good then. Maybe one day I can actually just go over there and experience it myself. Never
yeah,
worked in the
yeah,
UAE, but why not? Who
yeah,
knows?
exactly. Yeah.
All right. So let's start actually with a bold one now, because this is the main topic and I will have a lot of parents listening to this episode, and maybe I'll
Yeah,
try to get a couple of questions from the audience and see how we can actually help them. So,
yeah.
are most language classroom unintentionally failing neurodivergent learners?
So just to distinguish, I think first between like the typical classroom versus a language based
Mm-hmm.
like more of a unit or a small group classroom setting. Most of the students that we work with at the moment would be in mainstream classrooms where
Got it.
they would have additional support within that classroom setting. So I know it depends on where you live, what the school setup is like, and you may have a school where you have small groups approach where there might be like 6 students in a small group. Where I think that from what I can see, and like I'm sure other people will have different perspectives, but we see that there isn't much ability to differentiate some things. So, for example, like the exam system is very much based on
Mm-hmm.
you learn or the traditional model of teaching. You go into a classroom, you sit down, you're taught at, and then you have to learn a lot of stuff, and then you are given a written exam that you have to complete. And although things are changing, that is still the standard way that students do state exams like A levels and GCSEs or whatever system you're in, depending on
Mm-hmm.
the country that you're in. I think we're
Got it.
still on that kind of like trajectory. So unless that changes, then I think it's going to be difficult for students to be able to access that because not every student is able to access information in the same way. And
Yeah.
we need more adaptations to how they're assessed and to give people a fair chance then. Because, for example, if you're uh, neurodivergent or maybe a student that has dyslexia, for example, they may have a lot of great ideas. They have the cognitive
Yeah.
skills to be able to uh, come up with very creative ways of solving problems and putting a really good argument together, maybe in a project. But
Mm-hmm.
if the sole way to do that, sorry, is in writing, then it can be such a big barrier. So I think we need to look at ways to offer other means to students to be able to demonstrate what they know, and also how we even present information to them and making it as motivating and inclusive as we can from the get-go, not as a reactive thing.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
I think there is changes in a positive way, like the universal design for learning approach
Yeah.
in schools is very positive, and that is a lot more inclusive and recognizing that students all learn in different ways. So it's about how we kind of put that into practice.
Yeah, it's true.
No,
A couple
I
of
think the traditional model it doesn't suit many students.
oh, exactly. I mean, that's the traditional model, but if we actually go a little bit more on the teacher side, because
Yeah,
in the previous episodes, I remember one of the teachers actually that we were talking about dyslexia as well. Is something
yeah.
that it needs to be actually told. It needs to be spread, what this is, how can we actually help people with dyslexia or some sort of like another issues maybe. So we have a problem that is not only in the system itself, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when teachers says, for example, in a classroom, they go, no, this student is not trying. No. How often is that actually dyslexia or a neurodevelopmental difference or something like
Yeah,
that?
so the prevalence of dyslexia is like 10 to 15% of children will have it, but
Hmm.
it can be like just take that as an example, dyslexia, students can learn how to cover or mask their symptoms so that they may, because they have good cognitive skills, they might be able to come up with ways to get around things. They may
Hmm.
learn cues about that help them to maybe guess words. So when they are trying to read a text, they've gathered enough information from the context of what they're reading that they're able to guess accurately a lot of the time. But as the vocabulary gets more complicated as they move up through the grade levels, that strategy won't work anymore. And then sometimes it takes until that point where it becomes really evident that this child is struggling with their reading. So I think teachers do their best to identify students that have difficulties, but some of them may be subtle. Students might be good at compensating so that it's not picked up on unless they may have other uh, areas that they need help with, so that that kind of takes the focus away from that particular concern.
Hmm.
But I think sometimes then children are going to behave in a certain way because they want to avoid being called out to read in front of a group, for example. So they've learned
Yeah.
that by asking to go to the toilet a lot, or even like acting out and getting reprimanded, or getting the teacher's attention for behaving in an inappropriate way, then that's better than being singled out and feeling like
Hmm.
they're failing in front of the rest of their friends. So they learn different techniques and ways to divert the attention.
Yeah.
So then often that's is how it will show up if a child is struggling, because they may not have the language or the self-awareness to understand themselves why they are struggling versus like why their friend isn't having the same type of difficulties.
Hmm.
And because they may not have, obviously, as a young child, you're not going to really understand why can't I do it the same as my friend, no matter how much effort I seem to put in, this doesn't get any easier. And you start to believe that it's about you and that you're
Hmm.
less smart than someone else. So I think sorry, I'm kind of going off tangent there, but for teachers, it can be difficult to identify some children because it isn't the obvious way it presents is quite different across different students. And some children you'll know straight away that yeah, that looks like a reading related difficulty, or
Hmm.
it could be this, it could be X, it could be Y. But other children, it may not be as obvious. So I
Definitely.
think it's good to keep those questions in our mind. Is this actual like a behavior? Is the child trying to avoid something? Are they trying to maybe ask for attention in that way because they don't know how to ask for it in another way?
Yeah. So maybe, to my perspective, teachers needs to be a little bit more aware. They need to prepare a little bit more to identify this type of things, right? In the students
Yeah, I think
while in
it's
the
just, and
classroom.
I also think as well that it's hard for teachers, especially new teachers, because you don't get a lot of training on these areas, and then you're put into classrooms. You have a lot of children sometimes that have additional learning needs, and this is, I think it's something that comes with time and practice
Hmm.
and trial and error with, what will work for one child may not work with the other child. I think teachers need to be easier on themselves and not expect to be able to tackle this straight away, because
Yeah.
it's something that you need to, I suppose, spend a bit more time learning about and working with colleagues as well, and working together to come up with different maybe ways of presenting information and teaching can be really helpful as well, so that you're not on your own trying to figure it all out.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but I suppose if I was
Training.
to say is yeah, training and accessing like CPD type
Mhm.
courses, and being familiar with some of the red flags for different uh, learning needs.
Mhm.
So what are those key things to keep an eye out for if it's maybe a reading related difficulty, or maybe it's ADHD, maybe
Yeah.
it's like autism. So what are the key things to be looking out for? And then I think the more you know about what you're looking for, the easier it is to potentially flag something.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
then I suppose it depends on the school that you're in. Some schools that I've
Another
worked with
one.
have great
Hmm.
support systems in place. And as soon as a child is flagged, there'll be support given from the school side, usually from like a person from an inclusion team
Yeah.
might come in and do an observation. So the teacher has a way to get extra help, and obviously that speeds up the process of getting things identified quicker. And the earlier that we can identify, the better
Exactly.
for multiple reasons. Yeah.
Exactly. So the earlier is the better. I mean, but yeah, then we need teachers and the system, the school, all of them together, just working on that. So if we
Yeah.
have right now well, parents listening to us,
Yeah.
from your experience, what does dyslexia actually look like in a classroom? Not in theory, but in real behavior.
So it can be, so dyslexia can present in a few different ways. And I think it's good to be aware that it's not the same for each child, that every child is going to have a slightly different way of it presenting.
Hmm.
So it may look like a child who, in spite of being given like repeated instruction on how to read a particular like letter or vowel combination, that they struggle with it, and even when it's done repeatedly they don't seem to be able to retain it. So that can be then causing some frustration to that child. That's, I suppose, reading and being able to decode words. That's probably the most obvious red flag that we would see. But then we can see children, it can present in a slightly different way, because they may be able to sound out some words, but then when it goes to sentences, we see lots of errors coming up in their ability to read a longer piece of text. And then obviously as they go higher in the grade levels at school, a lot of learning comes from reading, and we're expecting children to be able to read and gather information from bigger pieces of written work. So you may, for some children, you might see the difficulties happening at word level, but then it might take a bit longer for things to become apparent.
Of course.
We also maybe see students that have um, difficulty with working memory. That can
Mm,
happen alongside the reading difficulties, and that can be a component of dyslexia too. So that because so much mental effort is being put into trying to decode words, then they're losing the capacity to, or the ability to retain other information. So by the time they get to the end of the sentence, they may have forgotten what the first part of the sentence was telling them to
yes.
do. And that can be a way that it can show up as well. But generally, I think it's when children are given some extra phonics structured intervention, and we still see that it's not really making the difference that we would
Need
expect it
progress.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the progress is slow. And also, often would hear teachers say things like, we have to keep revising things, and it doesn't seem to stick. They don't seem to be able to remember what we did from the previous session. So then the child's not really making the headway they need to. And then it starts to accumulate over time because they don't have those building blocks they need. Then the pace of the lessons is moving on, and that child is still in the same place. So therefore it just accumulates on top of itself. And that's why another one of the reasons why early intervention is so critical, because if you give them the right intervention at that point in time, it can give them the building blocks then to be able to progress with the class.
True. Definitely, that's an all. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good actually that you're raising this awareness and letting us know about that because many parents right now are who are actually just fighting first line. They are trying to help their kids, and
Yeah.
some of them they don't actually know how to identify this. And I think this is crucial actually, even from home. Not only starting in the school but also from home. I think it's part of
Yeah.
it, and maybe
And I
also.
think as well with parents, sorry, just to say as well, it's trusting your gut instinct because you know
Mhm,
your child best. And especially if you've spent some time with them and they're not,
yeah,
retaining things and you feel like you have to repeat it over and over, um, it should be a bit easier for them to move on in reading. Obviously, when children are younger, it takes time to learn the sounds and put sounds together and blend sounds into words. But if you feel yourself you've given it some time and you're not seeing the progress, it's no harm to flag it and to talk to your teacher.
yeah,
Get it checked if you can by someone at the school, because then at least you know you've done what you can. And the earlier you do it, the better, because then they get the help quicker. And when we leave children without help for extended periods of time, it has like it's potentially risky then for mental health as well,
yeah,
because they're having longer time where they're failing and they're feeling like it's down to them. Whereas if they can better understand their own way of learning and how maybe that they can access things in a different way, we're giving them coping mechanisms and another set of skills to be able to problem solve rather than constantly failing, which is the last thing we want for anyone to experience at school, because then it can just lead to, yeah, it leads to kids just checking out and not wanting to engage with any of the learning.
yeah. Exactly. No, you're right about it, about that because I mean that's the thing that we all want, see the kids succeed, not to fail.
Yeah,
But here we have
exactly.
also another question because, you know, some teachers or some parents, they have really big misconceptions about dyslexia
Hmm.
and language learning because I guess dyslexia is I don't know how you treat it or if you have actually had this type of issues in language learning, dyslexia,
Hmm.
how it actually damages or ma- the
Impact.
process of learning the language, a second
Yeah,
language, for example. How is it? How you see it? What's the misconception there?
I think certain languages are more prone to mistakes being made in
Hmm.
learning to read because they're not as uh, what's the word, like so some languages when we have they're more phonetic, so it's easier to read a word and it makes an obvious letter sound
Yeah.
transfer. For example, if you see the sound ah, that it would come up in the same way no matter in what context you read it. But in English, we have lots of exceptions to that. So there's many exceptions to the rule. And we talk about teaching children like tricky words and these are the irregular words that we come up
Hmm.
against in English. And English does have quite a high number of those words, whereas there's certain languages, I think it's Finnish, that's meant to be the most easy to read because the translation between the letter and the sound is consistent
Yeah.
generally across how you would see it in text. So if you have languages like that, generally the children with dyslexia won't struggle as much in that language. But if you have languages like English that have more regular
Mm. Yeah.
letter patterns, then it can be more
So
difficult, and then
so
symptoms will come
it's
up more obviously then.
yeah. So Spanish might be a little bit easier for an English speaker learning
Yeah, I
Spanish.
have to check the actual. You speak Spanish, so you'll
Yeah.
understand that more than I will because I don't speak Spanish. But like if you can read the letters and it's generally got a quite a
It-
consistent
yes.
way that
Same sound,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So then it's easier to read, and then the um mistakes or I suppose the errors coming up maybe are not happening so often. But again, it depends on the type of dyslexia that the child presents with as
Mhm.
well, because
So there are different
that may
stages
not
then.
be. There's just different subtypes. So we have
Mhm.
surface level dyslexia, where the child would make mistakes mainly on those irregular letter patterns. Whereas if they have more of a deficit with like phonological processing, it may mean that they will struggle across all the sounds in the word, not specifically irregular sounds. And then double dyslexia is when a child will have difficulty with working memory alongside the phonological processing. So that can be more of a serious way in how it presents.
Mhm.
And so it's good to keep those things in mind. And also that dyslexia can occur with other conditions. So with
Got it.
there's like a language difficulty, it's called developmental language disorder, and it's a specific language difficulty that a child can
Mhm.
have. And children with dyslexia or children with developmental language disorder are 50% more likely to have dyslexia. So if you have a child that has speech and language difficulties and you've identified that child in your class as having speech and language difficulties, they are more at risk of having dyslexia, and you should
Mhm.
keep an eye on that as they progress for that reason.
Got it. So
So
we
that's
have
something as
you
well
gave me
teachers
the
can be
example with
aware.
the Spanish. So we have the Spanish, but what about a tonal language? Tonal language like Chinese, for example.
Yeah.
That
What
would
was
be
the
even a
question?
lot more difficult, right?
So my
Because we were
understanding
actually
of
just
Chinese is it's symbolic more than sounding, isn't it? It's like it's a picture based. It's more pictorial than
tonal. It's a little bit
tonal.
more
Okay.
tonal. We got the tones. If you want to
Oh, and they're
pronounce
like
something.
accents that you
Yeah,
put.
exactly.
Yeah, true. Okay. Yeah.
And of course, we got the characters, and also they have the pinyin, it's called. It's like two
Okay.
systems in one. So it might be a lot more difficult then for kids who have dyslexia in this case to learn that
Yeah,
language.
it depends if it's a second language. But then if children are born into that language, it may not be as much of a. I'm going off actually in a different tangent now, but it depending on how when you're exposed to the language makes a difference
Mm,
too. So the early
got it.
exposure can make things easier. I think that's across all multilingual speakers. Like if they're exposed to the language from an early age, it can be easier then to become fluent in it. But
Mm,
again, it like you just said there, it will depend on the way the language is structured, the number of exceptions, the way accents are used, and those type of variables will have an impact on
mm,
how I
exactly.
suppose difficult it is to learn or to learn to read.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I'm asking this one because I've seen actually many couple of cases already in a language classroom, students who are really good at one language, in this case Spanish, that we actually just put them in here as an
Yeah.
example, but they're not as good I mean, they're good in Spanish, but when they have to actually go to English or go to another language, it's very difficult.
Okay. Yeah. Um. Yeah. Like from some of the students I've worked with that are bilingual, they will have struggles, but not necessarily in the same way across
Hmm.
the two languages. And I will try and get as much feedback from parents as I can
Hmm.
about how they're getting on in the other language so that you can get a
Hmm.
sense of is it different types of errors or how much is it impacting their ability to access that language too. Although
Yeah.
in an ideal situation, it would be great to be assessed across both languages to see
Mm.
how the difficulties are shown up.
That's another one there. So now that you've been in this field for such a long time and you're still actually working on this, w- now that you can actually take a look at all the classrooms there or in school,
Yeah.
what are the top three things you think that are actively harming neurodivergent learners?
Um, I think maybe if I say it in the other way and say things that I see as being helpful, because I think I'm kind of looking out for that more now at the moment. And it
Let's
might
do it
just the
helpful.
opposite would probably be true as well.
Yeah.
So I think we have environments that are predictable. There's a routine in place. There's a clear schedule of what's happening across the day.
Mm,
That's really helpful for all students. and they can see that supported with a visual. So it could be a picture of the activity. That's the best way, really, or some picture representation alongside the word so that the child can see what's coming ahead. And it helps to, I suppose, give us a sense of routine and what to expect, and it can reduce some anxiety. Or even if a child is struggling in a lesson and they know that, okay, I just have to get to the end of this, then it's my break time. So it can keep that motivation there for longer. So definitely having visual supports and scaffolds around the class
Hmm.
as much as we can. So things like the sentence starters maybe on the desk that are like extra prompts and cues that can help children to maybe start with their writing activity.